Hey everyone, this is Dexum, and here's my ranking video for rankings 11 through 20. With great skill comes a great Spider-Man player. Spider-Man has a lot of really great movement abilities. As you can imagine, his webs allow you to perform a lot of great crowd control, and personally, I feel like Spider-Man is the perfect mix of melee and ranged abilities. While Spider-Man uses web fluid as his primary resource, he has several abilities that don't use webbing at all. While he doesn't have anything inherently giving him criticals or brutals, Spider-Man just seems to hit really hard, and he has some good abilities for damage over time, and he's one of the few characters where using Hermes winged sandals as your legendary really makes a lot of sense. The reason why Spider-Man places where he does is because as great as his abilities are, in order to do the best damage you can with him, it's going to take a lot of practice. There's a lot of hidden power in Spider-Man, but his high level learning curve is really what places him in this ranking here. Colossus is a very interesting character. While he is a tankier character, with the ability to take a lot of damage, hold aggro, stun enemies, and knock enemies down or up as part of his crowd control kit, many of his abilities are actually summon abilities, where he can summon Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Magik, and Kitty Pryde, which gives him the opportunity to do both heavy melee damage and summon damage, while also staying pretty mobile and being able to take a lot of damage. And like characters like Psylocke, Colossus's primary resource is osmium armor, which, once restored out of combat, it will negate 60% of all incoming damage. There are actually some abilities that will recharge your osmium armor as well. While Colossus doesn't have any guaranteed brutal or critical strikes, he does have some abilities that will increase your brutal and critical hit chance, and his ability Steel Cyclone can be used indefinitely and hit a lot of targets in melee range and allow you to move around while doing so. And another good thing about Steel Cyclone is that for every 1% of attack speed, it increases the damage of Steel Cyclone by 1%. So there's a lot of synergies that you can do with Colossus's powers that make him a great character to play. Why he places here is because while his summons are powerful, you can't really keep them out all the time, which is much different than other summon characters. And while his abilities are very strong and he has a lot of survivability, there are other characters that just put out more damage than he does. But overall, Colossus is a very solid character, and I know I don't go into this very often, but his ultimate is one of the best ultimates in the game, allowing you to do non-stop brutal strikes for 20 seconds, while also providing a lot of good buffs to your allies, and it has a 20-second invulnerability duration, so while you're doing those brutal strikes, you take no damage. It's by far one of my favorite ultimate powers in this game. But most importantly, if you're a Colossus fan, there are so many great ways to play him, and so many different viable builds, you will not be disappointed. Ghost Rider is incredibly powerful. There are so many different ways to build him, and he has some builds that have arguably been the best damage you can do in the game currently. He also has potential to do decent crowd control, a ton of damage over time. He has one of the coolest attacks that you can do while moving, and he even has a guaranteed brutal strike. One of his builds using Damnation could potentially be one of, if not the strongest, AoE channels in the game. And with the right build, you can channel it indefinitely, and with a high critical and brutal chance, the amount of damage that you'll be doing is staggering. The reason why he places where he does is because while the Damnation build is one of the best builds for sustained damage in the game, in order to do it, it has a health cost of about 1300 health per second. So you'll need to build around health regen, and as with most channel builds, you're going to be stationary while you're using it. Also, while leveling, in some cases, you may find that he has some spirit issues, especially if you decide to take the talent Hell on Wheels, which turns Whirling Chain into Hell on Wheels, which allows you to ride your motorcycle around and do damage with your chain. Ghost Rider has a lot of great abilities and is just one amazing character all around. One thing that's important to note also is that it may take a little bit to be effective with him, as you'll have to learn all of his moves, his synergies, and the best talents for the builds that you're using. This kind of learning curve is what places him where he does. But as far as raw damage is concerned, he's definitely one of the top characters. When you think of a summon character, most people would think of Magik, as she has the potential for several summons that stay out and move with you at all times. She really is one of the easiest characters to play. She has several summons. She also gives you the opportunity to choose an enemy that you can capture and summon later. She has confusion abilities, and she has a decent mix of melee and ranged abilities, which gives her a little bit of versatility. But Mostly, if you're playing Magik, you're playing her as a summoner. The reason why she places where she does is because while she's an easy character to play, and while she's a very powerful character to play, you may find in certain circumstances that it's hard to direct your summons on who you want them to hit, or also with your direct damage with a sword, it can sometimes feel like it's a little disjointed, doing melee damage, while you also have several summons doing melee damage too. But luckily, Magik has a lot of ranged abilities, so that doesn't really have to be an option. Another thing people may not really like is that her signature, Otherworldly Nova, doesn't really do a lot of damage, but I still find it to be a very good signature, as it increases health, spirit, and adds a stun and damage over time, and it also hits all enemies in a wide AoE all around you. So for those out there considering Magik, you really can't go wrong. She's easy to learn, easy to level, and overall she's very simple to master. Squirrel Girl has created quite a following for herself, and in Marvel Heroes Omega, she is one of the weirdest and also one of the strongest characters that you can play. One reason that she's so much fun to play is because she has a special ability called Squirrel Friends that will summon a squirrel friend whenever you hit with any power. You can have 15 of these squirrel friends at a time, and each of them will do between 500 and 900 damage per second, and it'll just accumulate from there. This alone gives you a high opportunity for fantastic critical and brutal strike builds, as you can constantly proc a critical or brutal strike. She also has a guaranteed brutal strike with the ability Nutcracker, which you can augment in the later talent trees. And one of her best abilities is Baffling Dialogue, which is a huge AoE confusion ability that will confuse enemies for 6 seconds, and it runs on a 20-second cooldown as of this video. Another good thing about Squirrel Girl is there are a lot of ways to spec her talents to make her a viable character. She has some really interesting melee abilities and some great ranged abilities as well, and they're all fairly powerful. The reason that Squirrel Girl places where she does isn't because she lacks anything. She has good energy resource management, she has good crowd control, good movement abilities, and she can consistently put out high damage numbers. But there are characters who just do more damage than her, and because she does have several melee abilities, you can find yourself jumping in and out of melee range, which can put some new players at risk if they're just starting the game. But overall, she's a great starting character that also has potential for high-end play. As of this video, Black Cat was the newest character added to Marvel Heroes Omega on the console. There are several reasons why she places here. While leveling Black Cat starts out a little slow because of her lower damage and high energy consumption, after you reach 30, she really picks up and solidifies her place as one of the most versatile, fun, and powerful characters you can play. Black Cat has several builds that work very well for all content in the game, from a stealth melee build to a gadget build and several hybrid options. Just about anyone could find a playstyle they like with her. One thing that I really enjoy about her is her talent Pinpoint Accuracy. While looking at it, you may think that 2% is a pretty low chance for critical hits, brutal strikes, and instantly defeating non-boss enemies. I've noticed that this also procs with her damage over time abilities, and for high health blue and gold mobs, more often than not, they die from the effects of Pinpoint Accuracy. This can actually make her a really great character to farm with, but you'll also have the ability to do heavy direct and AoE damage too. We've also seen that her signature, Cat Scratch Fever, has several talents, some of which have the ability that when you brutal strike, you can hit for upwards of 3 million damage to a large group of enemies. And it has a relatively low cooldown, but for those of you interested in Black Cat, you won't be disappointed. Nova is an amazing character. When played right, he can be nearly untouchable. He's fast, agile, and he has both melee and ranged abilities. He has several pulsars that aid in crowd control, and Gravimetric Surge, his signature, boosts his stats by 80%. And it allows you to use his powers without a cooldown, which gives Nova the ability to do a lot of damage really quickly. It also increases his movement speed by 50%, and with a lot of Nova's abilities being able to be used while he's moving, it makes Nova one of the best characters in the game, as well as one of the most fun characters. And with his low price point, he's certainly a must-buy. Why he places where he does is primarily due to him not having any guaranteed criticals or brutal strikes, and that some of his melee abilities, while being pretty powerful, don't seem to feel very organic, as Nova is a very mobile character. But for the right Nova player, he could easily be a damage powerhouse. Jean Grey is probably the most diverse character in the game as far as available abilities and combo potential. And what I mean by that is that Jean Grey has two forms. She has her regular form, which is just Jean Grey, and then she has the Phoenix form, which changes almost all of her abilities in a lot of different ways. You can also switch between Jean Grey and the Phoenix form during gameplay. And when you make that switch, all of your abilities cool down, giving you the opportunity to make some really interesting and varied combinations while putting out a lot of massive damage. Overall, there's just so many things you can do. You can apply confusion, you can apply fear, you can summon allies, you can do heavy crowd control, AoE damage, piercing damage. She even has an ability to attack while moving. There are so many ways that you can play her, and none of them are really disappointing. You can always find something to like. But the reason that she places where she does is that, especially for new players, the in and out and changing of abilities can be really kind of confusing and maybe a little overwhelming, as it's important when you want to be effective with a character to know what it means to confuse somebody, to cause fear, what a telepathic illusion does, maybe which forms you should be. Maybe it's better to go with Jean Grey for certain fights over Phoenix, or vice versa, or switching in and out of them, and how to do that. Jean Grey's powerful nature can possibly be a hindrance for new players, but overall, for an experienced player that's looking for a character that can be complex as well as rewarding, Jean Grey is a perfect option. Deadpool is one of those characters that it seems like the developers created with nothing but fun in mind. Deadpool's primary resource is awesome. That's the actual name of it. It's actually awesome. And all your powers are free to use, meaning none of them have a spirit cost. More than that, your damage and your health increase based on your awesome level. So the more spirit you have, the higher your awesome level goes, and the more damage and health you have too. Deadpool also has an ability called Canadian Devil, which is both a melee and ranged ability that you can channel while moving around. Deadpool also has really good crowd control with his Little Deadpool ability that will taunt enemies onto an explosive gadget. But one of my most favorite things about Deadpool is his ability called Server Lag, where Deadpool hacks the system and enemies are stuck for a 10-second stun duration. So during this time you can do damage to all the enemies and they can't do anything, which is possibly one of the most helpful abilities in group settings and also in solo settings. Deadpool also has several abilities that have a 100% critical hit chance, which means he's a fantastic candidate for high brutal strike builds. The reason why he places where he does is because while he has a lot of potential and he's an amazing all-around character, his damage output is kind of limited, as his channel ability isn't exactly that high in damage, and also some of his abilities almost feel like duplicates, such as Flesh Wound and Psi Assault. But overall, he's a perfect character for new players and experienced players alike. For Deadpool fans out there, don't even hesitate. Many times I rate Kitty Pryde as one of the most underrated characters, and despite her being not in the top 10 on this ranking, I still feel she's one of the top 10 all-around characters in the game. And there's several reasons for this. Her guaranteed brutal strike, Line of Fire, does a lot of damage in a piercing shot to all enemies in front of you, while abilities like Watch Your Step, Phasing Samurai, and her signature Phased Out puts you underneath the ground and out of harm's way. In most cases, Kitty Pryde feels like she's untouchable. And another fun thing about her is she can just walk through most obstructions on the map, which we don't talk about much here, but being able to traverse the terrain quickly and easily really comes in handy. She also has several good AoE abilities, and most of her abilities hit pretty hard, with a lot of potential for damage over time from her Lockheed abilities that do fire damage. And the reasons that I placed her here is because despite all of the power and all of the high-end potential that she has, in the early game, I've been hearing from players that they really don't like her energy management with her Lockheed abilities, with some people opting to take Lockheed out of her builds altogether, which I believe sacrifices a lot of her damage. Also, one of her greatest abilities for AoE damage, Quicksand, is a channel ability that also roots you in place. So while she has high potential for AoE damage with it, she will be sacrificing a little bit of survivability to use it. But overall, there's way too many right things with Kitty Pryde that really outweigh those small problems. All in all, she's a fantastic top-tier character, and with one of the lowest Eternity Splinter costs, she is definitely worth a try. Thank you all for watching. I hope you're enjoying these rankings, and I'll see you guys in-game.